is life worth living? What is the meaning of life? Those are two of the biggest questions of all time. My guest today, Roger Selegue, raises those issues and others in his novel, No Sun Without Shadow. Pleasure to have you here today, Roger.
Thank you for having me.
And I should say at long last, too.
Yes.
Well, the thing that I loved about your book, though, is that this is kind of unabashedly a very philosophical novel. I mean, as I say, you go for the big questions. Is life worth living? What is the meaning of life? And I have to say, I get a lot of books from a lot of publishers all the time. And, you know, you get a lot of thrillers or, well, I'm going to hear about this if I say it, but chick lit, self-help, a lot of things. But you don't get a lot of, it's a literary work, which anyway, they seem to be few and far between. But so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And so what drew you to this topic?
Well, it was Albert Camus himself. I call this a novel obsession. And The Myth of Sisyphus, which I read in college in conjunction with Camus' The Stranger. Mm-hmm. But I was fascinated, and still am to this day. I cannot read the last 4 pages, which is the summation of The Myth of Sisyphus, without tears coming to my eyes.
And is that the part that you quoted throughout the book several times?
Yes. There are quite a number of quotes from The Myth of Sisyphus, which I love the language. I think one of the things is Camus learned to write from Hemingway, but I love the rhythm. But I tend towards the Irish writers myself, so the lyrical. Steinbeck, in some ways, is my model. I tend to feel that I think like him in the earthy tones. I was raised in Arizona among the Mexicans and the Indians.
That sounds like Steinbeck with...
It turned out to be an accident because my father died when I was 4 years old, and I was shipped off raised by an aunt and uncle until I graduated and went into the Marines. Mm-hmm. The novel itself, in my younger days, and I made a note of it, and I did it, I must say, purposely, because Camus says a person gets to be 30 and he starts thinking about the time is moving.
I had to laugh at that, by the way.
Why is that?
You know, 30. Well, they say these days, like the 50 is the new 30, or 40 is the new 30, or something. And,
that's true.
You know, these
I
days,
hope that's right.
30 is nothing. So, but I know what you mean. People have their midlife crisis at 30, apparently.
Well, in looking back, my life is, in many ways, it's slowed down and it's much more satisfying. At the period I wrote, I only wrote it about 4 years ago, and it took me 4 years. But I went in the Marines, and following that, I started college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I started in architecture, and then I wanted to write, and then I started in accounting, and I hated it. And I got into literature, finally. But this is during a period I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. Shaw has said youth is wasted on youth, and I finally understand that to mean you can't enjoy it. And the next thing you know, you're old, and
then you wish you could go back and redo it all again.
And when you have a little more money and a little more time.
That's why I tell young people, look, enjoy life, have fun while you're young, enjoy it. You know.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why I was fascinated because I think Virgil at the time is asking, is life worth living? He's brooding about the Catholic upbringing he had, which is out of my own experience. And I worked my first real job I had was working for a huge life insurance company. Right. I hated it. I felt I was in a cage, and yet I made friends I had for life. My second novel and first novels were edited by my boss at this place. So it wasn't all bad, but I felt caged. From that day forward, I never had a job that I wasn't outside. I worked as an insurance adjuster for a number of years, and then what we call a hearing rep in workers' comp, and then I went to law school and was practicing law.
Well, and that's one reason I found this novel interesting was that, you know, well, you mentioned your background as an insurance adjuster, and the character in the book, Virgil Tynan, who is also an insurance adjuster, or in the insurance business, feels kind of caught up in the corporate grind or in a, you know, I don't know, stuck in his cubicle or that kind of thing. And I just thought maybe, you know, people out there can probably relate to that I think, you know, there are people who, you know, hate their job or, you know, feel stuck in the corporate machine or something. So I think, you know,
that Greg, is the key to my work, and it's the key, I feel, to the myth of Sisyphus itself. We start out that Sisyphus was punished. And over the years, I hear people always making references to the rock, to carrying the rock. I know it's everybody's aware of Sisyphus, whether they read the myth or not.
Why don't you tell us what the myth is?
The myth is that for some reason Sisyphus had disobeyed the gods. There's been talk that we don't know exactly the reason, but he'd given man fire, and the gods did not like that. And for that he was condemned to take the rock up a mountain, roll it back down, and go down to meet it. This is where
so you're rolling it uphill, get to the top, it goes back down, you have to push it back up again over and over and over and over.
In perpetuity and forever. This is what fascinated me, because this is what I felt, and this is why there are scenes in the novel about Virgil looking out the window where he's caged, seeing men that look free to him, the working men, with their shirts off, sweating, muscular in the sun, and he feels closed in. And that's exactly the way I felt at the time.
And as I say, I think a lot of people feel that way in their corporate jobs. You know, they're pushing that ball uphill every day, and then the ball rolls back down, and they have to go push it up again. And so,
and that's what Camus was that whether life is worth living. He says answers the basic question of philosophy, and he talks about the routine of life, and that's what he compares directly to the myth of Sisyphus, of rolling that rock out, rolling it back down, and going down to meet it into eternity.
This guy, by the way, the character, though, well, whether or not you'd characterize it as obsessed, but he's definitely fixated or kind of focused on Camus, though, a lot. And I hate to say it, but Camus is not necessarily one of your more uplifting authors. I mean, if your favorite authors are like Kafka or Camus, you know, it's it's not all fun and games and, you know, picnic in the park and a good laugh and everything. So he has kind of, well, people talk about manic depressives and that kind of thing. I mean, do you think, was your intention to have him be someone who's kind of...
Yes, I pictured it. It's hard to know what you get on the page when you're writing, but I'm glad you brought it up, because because I wanted to bring a kind of brooding quality to Virgil and view what happens to him. And I wanted to bring that caged feeling he feels, so that the myth of Sisyphus fits in. It's not thrown in, that the myth of Sisyphus itself is an integral part of the plot, along with, there's a third person I have to put in. As I said, I was raised, and Virgil has a short-lived affair with Perdita, a Mexican-American, a young Mexican-American, and he screws it up with his drinking and his odd behavior. And Regina enters. Regina is Jewish. She's a divorcee. She's very experienced. And the Jews use a term called Zoftig that describes Regina.
Regina, what does that mean?
Very well built.
Oh, yes.
I've gotten some argument with
you do elaborate on her physical characteristics, yes.
It's one, but generally speaking, Zoftig in Yiddish, and by the way, Regina is Yiddish speaking. And I gave her the background, which turned out to be the same as my publicist, Erwin Zucker, which is Jewish, born in Brooklyn, the New York area, of Polish parents, of which Erwin is, and he spoke Yiddish growing up in the home. The woman who edited the novel was also Jewish and asked me, as several people asked, and my wife is Jewish, and I said no.
But you said, you're Catholic, but you worked with a lot of Jewish attorneys, is that?
I always have to explain to people, coming out of Arizona, and at that period, the word Jew was a biblical term. I didn't know any Jews. Then, as an adjuster, and as I worked the West Side, Fairfax area, and of course I had tremendous interaction with the Jews. The friends that I have are almost all Jews, and a number, particularly at the insurance company where I started out.
We'll be right back with Roger Selegue right after this. And we are back with Roger Selegue, author of No Sun Without Shadow. Well, again, you know, Camus was a great writer, and I've read his works, and I don't think his philosophical outlook on life is quite mine. I tend to be a little more, I don't know, optimistic, or maybe have a little brighter outlook on things overall. But he does, well, what it reminds me of these days, you know, people say in the work world that you should do what you love. And I personally believe that a lot. And so when I hear people who are stuck in jobs that they hate, or doing something they don't like, or the character in this novel who hates the insurance company, I kind of want to say to them, or to Camus, by the way, you know, look, you're not just a cog in the wheel, you know, do something you love, get out there and, I don't know, find another job. Or I don't want to say that it's the victim mentality, but there's kind of the woe is me, that, you know, life sucks and then you're just stuck. And that's a philosophical outlook, and there are great writers who believe that. And, you know, you've got Dostoevsky and a lot of the crazy writers who, but do you know what I mean? I mean, what's your take to that? Is it that easy, or, you know, do what you love, or what's your response to that? I mean,
one of the things is that Virgil was, and this is a period I can say that I went through, is that it's easy to say you don't know what you like sometimes. You come, you don't have any money, and you don't have any really skills. You don't know exactly what you really want to do. So you go where there's a job.
So he was paying the bills, and that's...
Yeah, you have to have some money coming in, otherwise you're going to be homeless. This is what creates my outlook, and my mentality is much different. Part of what fascinates me about Camus is the language itself. I always say I'm a sucker for a well-built woman and great language, which I've read probably completely 4 times, The Myth of Sisyphus. And the language, I'd like to read toward the end just a couple of passages to give you an idea, particularly the ending. Also, since you brought it up, I think Virgil is actually going against the grain of what Camus is hitting. Camus, he misinterprets because of the fix he's in. He doesn't know if he loves the Mexican until he loses her. She's a Catholic, naturally. And when Regina demands to get married, she is pregnant and demands to get married. And later on, Regina finds out how her father survived the Holocaust. That's not, and where being Jewish wasn't that important to her, it now is. So, she must be Jewish. She must be kosher. She must practice the religion. She must practice the customs. And she does this out of love. I want to say that is the difference between her and Virgil. Virgil, raised as a Catholic, was raised in fear. He was beaten in the name of God. There was no rationale to the way he was picked up, but he cannot get rid of it. His conscience is bothering him.
Well, religion is central to both of these characters pretty clearly.
Right.
Judaism or you know, Regina's Jewish, and Virgil is Catholic. You kind of go into the, you're pretty blunt, though, about Catholicism, and I know you're Catholic. You don't really spare the church, though, in a way. I mean, you're aware of some faults, and Regina likes to point them out. What are your takes on that? I mean, you know, does it put unnecessary guilt on him? Is he carrying a lot of Catholic baggage around?
Yes, he is. I try to make that clear. I call myself an ex-Catholic now.
Oh, ex-Catholic, okay.
So,
now I understand.
Or a lapsed Catholic, and people, but again, Jewish people said, "What's that?" And I said, simply, it's a person's no longer practicing the religion, but all the baggage is there, which is what I wanted. Regina is going in the other direction with what she's done, and she's a very strong character. That's she can be tough in a way to deal with, but I think there's a lot of humor in the book, particularly that you have to go with it when they're buying the rings over in Beverly Hills. Which I had some experience with, again, as an adjuster. I used to go to Marvin Himes, who did work for the movies and stuff, and provide jewelry as an adjuster. One of the ironies in that you're always saying, Jews will say, get it wholesale. Virgil is trying to buy the rings as cheaply as he can, and Regina's having no part of that.
She doesn't want a cheap ring.
No, and she gets what she wants, but she turns to him and says, "What do you think I am, a cheap Jew?" It depends. That's basic humor, and it's raw in a way, but I put it as being funny, and and defining the two sides.
Yeah, but you kind of take on sort of the stereotypes of both sides and kind of, I guess you'd say, point out what you may or may not feel is true or correct about each one, or that, you know, I don't know. I mean, what's your take on that? That, you know, again, that since you call yourself
I think you're partially right, and it's hard. In other words, I love the old story about T.S. Eliot, a student. He came in and said, a student told him some interpretation you have of the wasteland, and T.S. Eliot said to the student, is that what you saw? And the student says, yes, and T.S. Eliot said, then it must be there. And Camus says in Myth of Sisyphus, a symbol always ends up meaning much more than the author ever consciously intended. You try to create characters that are real, and the person who edited my book said my writing was very real, which I think is the best compliment I could ever get. So in terms, I did take the cliches from both sides, but you hope out of that you create a fuller human being. But you have a very good point, but I hope it's beyond that.
Have you had any reactions from Catholics?
No, I haven't. I've had more reactions from Jews.
And what do they say, positive or negative?
Some don't like Regina. Most have said, "Oh,
because she didn't marry a Jewish boy," to use a stereotype from the book.
That's funny because they said there's so much more intermarriage going on between Jews and other sects, but there have been a number of Jews that are objecting to what's going on. And I read an article about that when a Jewish woman said when somebody in the family married a non-Jew, it was a time for great sadness, and I think that's still true. So I tried to bring that all into the mix, and for what Regina stands for and what I think the Jews stand for in many ways, collectively and generalizing with a person. I think in the beginning, you have to keep reading because Virgil has his finger up his gastrointestinal tract, so to speak. And,
as Regina tells him. Yeah,
that's right, and Regina's going full speed ahead. Regina knows what she wants in life.
Yep.
And that's the point in the juxtaposition. I put the two characters over purposely. He is having a hard time. In the meantime, he's going the wrong way with the Myth of Sisyphus in ways I don't think Camus ever intended. And I think you're perceptive in picking up the negative because that's the way he's reading it. Now, Regina, as I've said a number of times throughout the novel, is not an intellectual, but she's street smart. Right. She's street smart. And she tells Virgil time after time at different times in the novel, he's driving himself crazy with this Myth of Sisyphus. She tries to get rid of it. She's absolutely right. He cannot abide by it. And when she throws a book or tries to hide it, he goes and gets it again. The Myth of Sisyphus is on his mind from beginning to end, as is the lessons learned in the Catholic Church, which are basically all negative, out of fear, hell, all this. I have to say, one of my Jewish friends, it was a shock because during the writing of the novel, I found out Jews don't believe in hell. I said, gee, I'm ready to convert already. So there are tremendous differences, and then they get more pronounced as they go. I think, again, there's a lot that goes on, the scuba diving. One of the things I used to scuba dive, and I was an instructor at one time, is to try to describe for the reader what it's like to be underwater and to see the tremendous
One thing I didn't
life.
realize was the, what's the term for it, the high that you get when you're underwater, the deep water.
Rapture of the deep.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess maybe I vaguely remember hearing about that, but where you actually get drawn when you're diving, you want to continue
It's
further
something
down.
you want to be careful because once, I've never experienced it. I've read a great deal about it, and I've gone down over 150 feet. But it's something you want to be careful is because these are the things, and that's what I described ultimately with Virgil, is that you're so enraptured what's going on, you forget where you are.
So you kind of get high off of the...
It's an absolute high. Most riders, the professional riders about scuba diving, and that's exactly what they describe it as, being drunk, intoxicated. And once you come back up, the effect goes away, and there's no hangover.
But there's a tendency, though, when you're down there and you're high, to, well, you can end up killing yourself because you take your you use the example of taking your oxygen mask off and wanting to feed the fish or something, or
that's right.
Or enjoying the sensation so much that you don't want to go back up, and so you end up drowning or dying from.
That's exactly right, and that's a sensation. I found the sport itself is wonderful. It's wonderful to be there. You just forget everything else that's around you.
You never experienced that, though?
No, I probably wouldn't be here if I was.
Did you know anybody who did? Or
no, I don't. Because they don't come back. And you have to, it happens to different people, but I always felt that the kind of person I was, I probably would experience. They said different people get it at different depths, depending how you're built. I always felt I would get it fairly early, with the kind of intellectual being that I was and the type. But everybody gets it.
Everybody.
If you go deep enough.
Well, I guess that's another reason for me to not go scuba diving. We'll be right back with Roger Selegue. And we are back with Roger Selegue, author of No Sun Without Shadow. Well, again, this character, in keeping with the theme, is life worth living, does have almost kind of a fixation with suicide, or contemplates that question a lot, and doesn't always seem to be sure what the answer is, or thinks, that's all just kind of a drag, But I had read that, again, I guess what I'm wondering is how much from your own background that you've kind of drawn on in some of that cases, because when you mention your career as an insurance adjuster, and even maybe the growing, or more the agricultural setting, the blue collar kind of town, or things you went through in Vegas, that sort of thing, to even, I believe in your bio, you say that you had a spell or trouble with alcoholism at one point. And so how much did that, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, can you relate to what he's going through?
Oh, absolutely. That's particularly those years, as I described them, feeling helpless, not knowing. You mentioned about finding something you like. He doesn't know what he likes. He doesn't know skill. He doesn't have any skill. He feels closed in, and he doesn't know what to do about it. That's the problem. That's the negative that keeps grinding at him. When Regina telling him he has a child to support now, he feels even more that he's closed in. He's trying to live. He finds the personal outlets in the scuba diving, in the sex, of which I try to make it clear that Regina is very earthy herself, and that's what brings them together. There's a great deal of my background in Virgil's. It's still only a percentage of Virgil, but a great piece.
Well, for instance, one thing I found interesting was that you were an insurance adjuster for years during that business, and then decided to go at a rather late age, comparatively speaking. You went to law school, right? And
I did, yes. I was in my 50s when I...
50s, wow. Well, congratulations, though, for going. And
Thank you. I found out I am an alcoholic. I have 35 years of sobriety on Alcoholics Anonymous. If somebody's having a problem, I really recommend it. It's a marvelous way, and for me, it's made my life much different today. It's a spiritual program. It's not a religious program, and in that, I found much more peace today than I ever had when I was young. I think that's important. And I think you really struck me with about Camus being negative, because I don't think of him that way. And as I say, what happens is that Virgil goes in the wrong direction for all the reasons that makes writing important. It's not. I'm working on a satire. I only mention that because all my writing, the 3 novels, have been out of my life and experience, but it's still a novel. So that it's fashion. It has a border on it, and this why I'm trying to make it literature as much as I can.
Well,
And
thank you
story.
very much for being here today, Roger. I sure appreciate it. The book is No Sun Without Shadow by Roger Selegue. Surprise ending. I won't tell you what that is, but that definitely caught me off guard. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.